to the cloud. Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for education webinar, Lessons Learned from a Bus Bench Activist, featuring Angela Engel and hosted by Uniting for Kids and the Indivisible Front Range Resistance Education Team. Before we start, let's have everyone share a quick introduction in one sentence. What brings you to the cause?
Can you hear me?
Well, I'm Lynn. Hi, I'm Lynn Anderson Thayer, and I had kids in the schools when all this craziness was starting, and they were definitely impacted negatively, even though they had gotten most of the way through the schools. So I've just been working on this as a community activist ever since, and it's hard work.
Thanks, Lynn. Carol, would you like to go next? Can you guys hear me okay?
Now I can. Do you want to call somebody, Amy, to go next?
Yeah, Carol, would you like to go next?
Okay, I'll go next. I have been racking my brain as to why I jumped in this way, but I think it had to do with Common Core and opt-out and treating our children like they were somebody else's children, and you know, I just don't like that part of it at all. And I have, everybody knows, but I was a public school teacher in the inner city for 20 years, and I think we've gotten so far away from what I would call real education that I just have to be involved. That's it.
Thanks, Carol. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I forgot to add, if you could put yourself on mute after you introduce yourself, that'll cut out some of the background noise where we can hear a little better. Okay, Teresa, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name's Teresa Smith. I have 2 kids in public school, and I first got involved when I learned about opt-out, and then that brought me to Uniting for Kids and some other groups. But opt-out was really the cause that got me first involved.
Thanks, Teresa. And how about Susan?
Hi, Susan Johnson, 2 kids in public schools, and long story short, I'm here and involved to keep public schools public.
Thanks, Susan. Tim.
I'm Tim Krug. I'm a parent in Douglas County of 2 children, and I'd like to see students and teachers become the focus of schools once again.
Thanks, Tim. And Lita, am I saying your name correctly?
You sure are.
Okay, I won't call you Cash in a flash.
Okay. My name is Lita Calvin, and what brought me to the table is I've been able to see firsthand the standardized testing that's done to our youth for years. And so I'm truly an advocate for opting out because standardized testing doesn't point to what attempt that our youth truly have. So very passionate.
Okay, thanks, Lita. Could everyone hear that? That sounded it was harder to hear you for some reason.
Oh, okay.
Oh, maybe, yeah, if you just scoot a little closer. Do you mind to say that again? Sorry.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better. Thanks.
Okay. What brought me to the table is I've seen firsthand what standardized testing has done to our youth, especially all my kids are out of school now, but I was very involved in my son's schooling. And I mean, it was an atrocity to see standardized testing going to our kids from the smallest to the tallest, and has kept kids in fear of failing, not being able to pass a test. So that's something that I've been passionate about.
Okay, thanks, Lita.
Could you hear me okay?
Yes, I could. Could everyone else?
Okay. They're giving the nod.
Okay. And Joe, would you like to give a quick one-sentence introduction? What brings you to the cause? Can you hear us, Joe?
He might not have audio.
Okay. I don't see a visual either, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
This might be Joe. Oh, okay, great. So thanks for joining, Joe.
Okay. Is there anyone else left that didn't do a quick introduction? What brings you to the cause? Is there another Susan? I see another Susan, but maybe it's just my computer besides Susan Johnson. No? Okay. All right, so I am Amy Carrington, and I am leading the education team in Indivisible Front Range Resistance. I got involved in politics after the election last November, and I'm a former teacher in elementary school. I taught third grade in Littleton Public Schools, and I'm a current stay-at-home mom. I'd like to teach again at some point. I'm a little frightened about what it's going to be like in a few years, so I am involved to see what I can do to help also keep public education public. Thanks for being with us tonight, and I'm sure most of you know Angela already, but if you don't, give a quick intro for Angela. Angela Engel is the Executive Director of Uniting for Kids. She's the author of Seeds of Tomorrow. She's a parent. There it is. Oh, Uniting for Kids. She's a parent. There's Seeds of Tomorrow. Former teacher and advocate for children and public education. And Angela, you've been around for some time now to witness the destructive reform movement in public education. Let's begin with how you got started as an education activist.
Sure. Well, I started out as a teacher also. I was in 4th grade. And, initially I was really excited about a standards-based approach. And I thought this will be a great way for me to demonstrate all the wonderful things that I'm doing in class. And so at one point, everyone's going to laugh at this, but it was my goal to have the first standards-based classroom in my school. And, I was a young, impressionable teacher and, thought that there must be something I know that not everyone else knows. And as I began to go down that path of really tying the learning objectives to students' outcomes, what I witnessed was all of the vitality that really drained from the classroom. And, it was just fascinating because the 3 years before I did that was very project-based, cooperative learning, and there was just so much engagement, and you could really just see the excitement and the enthusiasm in the classroom. Kids just were absolutely on fire, and it was a great place to be. And as I began to make this transition to a standards-based classroom where everyone's learning the exact same thing and demonstrating the exact same thing in the exact same way in ways that could be captured and measured and quantified, I literally began to watch the culture shift and the loss of learning. And so I started asking the questions about, what's happening? Why is this happening? And I learned the most important lesson around standardization and high stakes reform, which is, it's what we've done is to take away the intrinsic learning from the students. And so it's no longer about where do they want their own learning to lead? What are going to be their outcomes? But in that moment where I said, oh, standardization is a great idea because I get to show what a great teacher I am. And it's not about, me and showing what a great teacher I am. It's about those students and them being able to maximize their own learning and them being able to direct their own learning. And what we've done throughout the last 20 years with No Child Left Behind and Common Core and high stakes testing is really to hijack the learning from our students. And it has long-term consequences in terms of our economies and having innovation and diversity. It has consequences in terms of how we can sustain democracy because you have kids that are compliant and conforming rather than, creating and leading. So that's, and then I went on to learn the two most other valuable lessons as I began to look at high stakes testing, I understood that the number one correlating factor to test scores is socioeconomic status. And so in essence, what we've done is implement a system that rewarded wealth and punished the disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged populations. And, I knew from the very beginning that this would lead to greater segregation, fewer opportunities, and a wider achievement gap for children of color and children of lesser means. So it was really in that whole process. I'll never forget when I got I was the first cohort of teachers to administer the CSAP tests in Colorado. And when I got that test and distributed it to my students, I thought, this is the worst assessment tool I've ever seen. And I'm about to hand it out to my students. And then 3 years later, the governor of Colorado, Bill Owens, decided that he was going to grade schools based on those tests. And, it was like, you could see the writing on the wall that this was really going to disempower educators and undermine our public schools. And that's exactly what it's done.
Thanks, Angela. So where do you think that you have been able to make the greatest impact? Board meetings, state board meetings, or local school district meetings, one-on-one? Where do you think you've been able to make the greatest impact?
Well, it's, when you're involved in this work, it's a collective effort, because not one person can do it on their own. So I would answer that question from a we standpoint. We're up against pretty significant economic interests, and they have a lot of power in terms of being able to drive the message. Susan, I'm thinking, Susan, that you have a phone on that's picking up audio. So are you dialed in two different places?
Which Susan are you talking to?
You, Susan Johnson. Is this
No.
second Susan you also?
No, it's not me.
Okay, got it handled. So, in terms of what effort we've been able to make collectively, I think opt-out stands out. And I love the aspect of boycotting, because I think what was so powerful about the opt-out movement was that we just said, we don't have to play along. These are our children, and you might adopt a system that makes money and that works for your political agenda, but we as parents, we don't have to play along, and we don't have to conform to that, and we're not going to. So it was the simplest thing to do that had the greatest amount of impact, and it worked. It was effective. I mean, we've seen states all over the country that have then gotten involved in that, and it didn't cost any money. And, people could quietly write a letter to their schools and just say, I'm voicing my dissent in a way of not participating. But there's been a lot of things that we've done. And what I would add is that what's been most effective is a collective approach. And often in the movement, there's this kind of like, oh, you can only do it this way. This is the way that we need to challenge it. And there's a lot of judgment when it comes to, what's the most effective. And my position has always been everything is the most effective approach. Simply look for the opportunities. I mean, we, Uniting for Kids found out that there was going to be a charter school celebration at the Capitol, and they were celebrating the Day of Choice, and we put together a county counter rally and showed up with protesters and signs, and that being able to be agile and adaptable and versatile, and simply to look at where are the opportunities. We I wrote the resolution to oppose No Child Left Behind, and it was a very simple resolution. It was 2 pages, and it simply said, we as a state recognize that federal direction of how we manage our schools is not going to be effective, and it hasn't been effective. And we as a state have the most vested interest in how our schools do and how our students are educated. And so it was essentially a no faith proclamation to the federal government. And I very sneakily slid that into the legislature. I had sponsors that were the most extreme on the conservative side and the most extreme on the liberal side. And it passed the Senate 32-3. It passed the House Education unanimously. And we literally were going to slide this resolution through. And that resolution really became the premise for the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind in What's the Every Child Succeeds. Now, it's not exactly the same, but we planted some seeds and we laid some groundwork. We would en masse show up at a local school board meeting and we would give testimony. And then that next school board meeting, there would be twice as many people that showed up to testify. So what we brought was not just a success in terms of a strategy. I'm sorry, my dog's barking. or in terms of a cause, but that collective effort of more people speaking out, of demonstrating more venues where we could have impact, of finding more strategies to push back, writing letters to the editor and then being able to share those out. I mean, there's been so many things we did. These webinars have been really effective. Things like, showing up to testify for bills. A bunch of us, I think 10 of us, in fact, just went to the State Board of Education and we coordinated our testimony so that we weren't repeating each other. And, we made sure that we all hit on the talking points. So I wouldn't say that there was one thing in specific that's been most successful. What I would say is that the fact that we have approached this from a shared spirit of collaboration and togetherness, and then just a willingness to push back wherever the opportunities availed themselves.
Okay, thanks, Angela. So I'm curious to know how we can combine efforts with multiple education advocacy groups at strategic times. You talked about that sharedness, whether it be around a legislation effort, educating the general public, school board, other local elections. And we all know there's so much value in grassroots groups, but it seems there's also a need for a collective and effective effort as well.
Yeah, and I think, being able to work collectively and collaboratively will have the most impact. I mean, if we literally want to change the destructive consequences that have happened as a result of standardization and high stakes testing, the ability of all these grassroots groups from throughout the country, throughout the various states coming together, that's the answer. And that's the mission of Uniting for Kids. I mean, our goal is to serve as a hub for those coalitions to be able to, share resources, to provide common platforms, to mobilize, people in numbers. And, sadly, it's been, I think, one of the greatest challenges. And I'm not sure why, because we have so much to gain from working collectively. But, at the end of the day, people are people and we have our egos involved. And so, I found that there's a lot of territorial battles. People come at it like, well, we're only working in our community. Our community, this is where everything, the urgency is. So this is where we're working. It was interesting because a woman came up to me the other day and she said, I talked to somebody about you, Angela, and they said that you create a lot of enemies. And at first I was really hurt by that comment because I've given 25 years and, most of it's been pro bono and, it's been a life cause for me. And so that whole idea of, that being rejected and that being kind of tagged, it's painful, and that doesn't happen very often. Usually people are really supportive, but occasionally you have those kind of undercurrents of competitiveness and undermining. And James Martinez said something to me. He said, Angela, it's those of us that challenge the status quo that really make people uncomfortable. And you can't expect to ask for more and challenge the injustice and then have people pat you on the back and say, oh, aren't you wonderful? So, that's kind of what we're up against, is that we're unpopular, and there's a natural inclination for people to want to disassociate themselves from what's unpopular or what's associated with conflict. And yet we can't do this work. I mean, you can't challenge the injustice and then expect that everybody's going to like you. And, people want to be liked. I mean, people want to be part of the in crowd. And so, and they also want to be part of the winning team, and I have to say that those of us that are grassroots, that are pushing back on corporate reform, that have really stood in opposition of, full legislators that have said, no, accountability is the answer. Accountability is the answer. That we're not the popular ones, and we're not the in crowds. And certainly the idea of us, being the winning team is far-fetched. So those are the kind of human aspects that we're up against. And yet what I can tell you is that lack of ability to create partnerships and collaborate and coordinate efforts has resulted in the burnout of organization after organization after organization. So it's like, we know that we have to do that. We have to share resources. We have to work together. We have to promote each other and advance each other's work and initiatives. And yet, we find ourselves in those positions where we're like, no, we have to be, just focused on our corner of the, battlefield right now, or, this is our leader, or we don't have a leader, so we're not, going to get behind any leader. So, I mean, those are just kind of the challenges. And if anybody else has an answer to this question, I would love to hear it, because it's been the source of, one of the biggest sources of my frustration.
So, Angela, can I ask a quick question?
Sure. Benzel, I think we were going to save Q&A for the end. Is it pertinent to that piece right there?
Yes.
Okay, please do. And
So,
Benzel, could you just introduce yourself? Because we did that at the beginning, so if you just don't mind giving your name.
Sure. My name is Benzel Jimerson, and I am the site coordinator for the Denver 5 Points Family Leadership Training Institute and principal owner for Diversity Dynamics. And so my question to that is when I hear that and I think about just the burnout of years in the battlefield, is there, or has it been explored, I guess, anything that's is there any other way to approach it other than completely wiping out standardized testing inside of this? Or is it, is that really just because I'm not familiar enough, but is that the only route to go? Or in some of this collaboration, the joining with other organizations, is there any other opportunities for to make it better than it is already, but maybe not being able to wipe out? So there's some progress or some more progress, or is that really the only way that the mission can work because it is so destructive?
So that second part of your question, really is the answer. So you can't get to, for those organizations that are working for equity, you can't get to equity and use a system of measurement and measure success that's based on a system that, uses an eugenics tool and is culturally biased and, reinforces those economic divides. Those that say, our goal is to create opportunities for children with disabilities. Well, you can't say we want to promote personalization and diversity and then say, but we subscribe to a one-size-fits-all, model of education. So what we find is that there are aspects of the reform that are in direct conflict with those goals that would otherwise be a shared goal. I think everyone says, we're for creating more opportunities for children of color. And yet those same groups would say, but we're not going to get rid of standardized testing because, we believe in a system of accountability. And so, that's part of the challenge of coalition building is sometimes people drawing too hard lines in the sand of, no, we're simply about, children with disabilities. And yet, if we don't address inclusion and if we don't address differentiation from a systems approach, whether it be curriculum or assessment or teacher training, then you're not going to meet the needs of that community. So it's kind of like, no, this is my platform and I'm not willing to look at any other platforms because that might take me away from the work that I'm doing. And so, unfortunately, we end up working against what would have otherwise been our natural allies. Teachers unions are an excellent example. Teachers work for students. They ultimately want what's in the best interest of students. And yet the teachers unions in general have said, no, we're not going to take on the issue of standardized testing because it's too political. And, we don't want to eliminate our ability to have a seat at the table by challenging that. And yet, A, it's not in the interest of students, and B, it has really undermined the teacher's profession because it has transferred the authority away from them and it is put it in the hands of test publishers that then don't have any accountability. So does that answer your question? And in terms of what our cause is, I would just say at Uniting for Kids, we have a tolerance for diversity. So there are some people that say, we're for formative assessments. We believe in formative assessments. There are some people say, no, we're willing to accept that you have a single national assessment tool like NAEP and that you administer a standardized tool across the nation as a benchmark to a sample of students. And there are some that say, we just want to remove the high stakes that are associated with tests. And, our concern is less for what is the outcome, but more for the dialogue of those conversations. And ultimately, what is serving the interest of kids? And if it's not serving the interest of students, then let's not do it.
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Benzel. So Angela, the next question I think you answered, it was about challenges or obstacles that new activists in education can anticipate. Is there anything that you want to add to that, or should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on. I think we might circle back around to that too.
Okay. And then you talked about this just a little bit too, but how does one avoid burnout? We all want to know.
Yeah, and I did a webinar through FLTI, the Family Leadership Training Institute, which is the leadership program. It's a wonderful program, so I encourage people to check that out online. It's Family Leadership Training Institute of Colorado, and I'll try and provide that link. If someone wants to Google YouTube that, I think you'll be able to find it, and we can post that. But I did, yeah, an entire webinar on how to sustain leadership, because really ultimately that's at the root of the question, is how do we make sure that people don't get so fried that they throw up their hands and say, I'm gone. We can't lose people. There's too few of us. We don't want to afford to lose people. And I'll say that the people that are attracted to this work are, they're honestly the people that want to give the most. And so they end up giving too much. And really navigating that balance of how can I address this? How can I contribute? How can I make an impact, but not give too much? And that's a personal question. I would say for myself, how I have managed 25 years of engagement in what has felt like an unwinnable situation is balance. Balance has really been the key for me. And particularly at Uniting for Kids, we take the summers off. We spend time with our families. We unplug. We fill our cups. We take care of ourselves, and it's needed. And I think that we can give each other permission to do that. Like, it's okay to go away. We'll be here when you come back. The cause will be here when you come back. The work is never going to go away. So take care of yourself and then come back. And we at Uniting for Kids really have a culture that says, we care about you. So put yourself first and your families first, and then put the cause second. And I have found that aspect of self-care has been the most essential lesson in my continued advocacy. And I do things like I work out 4 times a week, 5 times a week. It's on my calendar. I have a deep spiritual practice that allows me to detach from the outcomes. So I care about, where this leads. I care about the work that we do, but I'm not attached to the outcomes. I know that this is who I am, and this is what I meant to do, and that I give what I can give, and I don't apologize for not being able to give more. And I dance and listen to beautiful music and work in my garden. And I think probably the most important thing that I do to avoid burnout is to surround myself, by the best people. And that's been the benefit of doing this work, is that I have the privilege of working with the smartest and the most generous and the wisest people. And so to create a community that says, yeah, we're going to work on this, but we're also going to play together, and we're also going to be a comfort to each other, has been how I've avoided burnout. And it's a skill that you have to develop, because in the beginning I was awful at it, and I would get to those places where I was just like, I can't talk to anyone, I can't hear anything, I can't open any emails, I can't, I just simply can't function anymore. And when you find yourself getting to that place, it's okay, time for a timeout. So
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that question.
So in the interest of time, I think we have a few more questions, but I don't want us to run into the Q&A at the end. So what are some of the characteristics of the groups that saw the most success?
So I think, some of the groups that saw the most success, United Opt-out was, led by Peggy Robertson and Tim Slecker, and I'm forgetting some names here. But I think, some of the successes that I see in the movements are really great leadership. Great leadership can't be underemphasized. It's essential. And, in grassroots groups, they're often kind of democratically organized, and there's an egalitarian kind of model. But you still need someone to provide direction, to set a culture, to keep people engaged and focused and accountable. So good leadership. And then also I would say finding consensus about what we're all committed to. And, Benzell's question about, is there room for diversity in terms of those goals? There is, but really good groups are able to coordinate coordinate around common goals and common objectives and common agendas. And without that, if you can't coalesce around a shared kind of values, then they fall apart and they become impossible. And the other thing that I already talked about and touched on a little is just, really creating a cultural environment that allows everyone to have a voice, that really builds on each other's strengths, that creates opportunities for people to contribute in a way that fits with both their skill set and their own goals and desires.
Okay. What would you focus on next or put most of your energy toward?
Well, this year with Uniting for Kids, we really put a lot of emphasis on social media. And we had we ran some social media campaigns that were really successful. I think we increased our web traffic by 640%. So social media, and so a lot of us are older and part of an older generation, and we find ourselves in this new technology generation that creates an information gap. And so being able to learn that and overcome that becomes really crucial to being able to get the message out and then, connect with other people, connect with other organizations. So really mastering the message and then disseminating the message and then disseminating the message with targeted audience is where we need to, continue to attend and put our energy. I know just personally, I have been awful at raising money.
That was the next question.
Yeah. And I have felt like raising money detracts from what I'm good at and being able to frame things and package agendas and, do strategic coordination, strategic development. But you have to have money. You can't make the wheel run without, oiling the cogs on the wheel. So I'm probably the worst person to ask, but I did run for the State House of Representatives, and I raised $40,000 in a district that was considered absolutely unwinnable. And I learned a lot about fundraising in that, and that's just those direct asks, brings in the most money. So literally getting on the phone and saying, would you make a contribution to this cause? And people do. They want to make a difference. They just need you to ask them and extend the invitation. We just had a fundraiser here at my home. It was like an open house fundraiser, and we had a wonderful time. So many people came to volunteer to help with food and drinks, and it was a great opportunity for us just to connect. And we raised over $1,000. So I think that grant, it would have been, I really searched for a grant writer for a long time. But being able to go after some of those grants would have been enormously helpful. And it's that kind of stuff is really a full-time job. It really requires somebody that's full-time working on that. And, we have thin resources and few people. And so in terms of what's the best way to raise money, people being willing to get out their phone books and their cell phones and get on the phone and say, I'm engaged in something that's really important, and you've got to have resources to be able to do this work, and would you make a contribution, is going to be the most important, the most effective strategy.
Okay. 2 more questions before our audience Q&A.
Okay.
What advice do you have for new education activists?
I would say, don't reinvent the wheel. I think that there's a lot of people that they come at this and there's this sense of urgency, and a lot of times, people end up just repeating what's already been done rather than tapping into an existing organization where they can take on a leadership role or where they can utilize their energy. And again, the movement attracts kind of those very altruistic people that can sometimes get tripped up in their own capes. And, you know, just don't try to do everything. Like, if you're new to this movement, don't try to do everything. Pick one thing that you're going to master and you're going to be excellent at, and do that. And then the second thing is, it requires a coalition. It requires a team. So find your tribe, find your community of people, and, you know, start by learning what has already been done and what's worked, and then go from there.
Okay. And one last question, then we'll start Q&A from those of you that are listening. What does the future hold for Uniting for Kids?
How about I save that question to the very end?
Oh, you want to do that? Okay.
Yeah.
That works. Okay. Okay. So does anyone have any questions for Angela that we haven't touched on yet?
I was wondering what your fears are for the future of this movement, or any advice you have to keep it moving forward, because it can get really it can be difficult because you don't see a lot of wins, although I think we made some real headway. And maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the headway you've seen and what you.
Okay. So, hold on one second. Let me.
Something is noisy.
Yeah.
I'm going to mute myself as well, just in case.
Okay. I think it was, I think we got that covered. So it was, Eve, I muted you just so you know. The question was, I think it was multiple part question, Lynn, but one of the questions that I heard come out of that is what's some of the headway that we've made. And, you know, I'll just tell you that when we started out, I was fortunate enough to get connected with Don Pearl. And Don Pearl is a professor of Hispanic studies out of Greeley, Colorado. And he was a teacher in a migrant population, and he refused to administer the test. And in his refusal to administer the test, you know, really was born the idea that if a teacher refused to administer the test, then certainly parents could refuse to participate in the test. And what the headway that we've gained there is that, you know, we went from, and like, I mean, I think when I first started out, and I inadvertently became kind of the face of the parent opt-out movement in the beginning, our opt-out numbers were like in the low 1,000s. I mean, there was like 1,200 people that were opting out initially. And then now we have, I think last year we had like 84,000 opt out. So we have made significant gains in terms of communicating what's wrong with standardized testing and why it is really destructive, you know, for kids, and why it affects, why it leads to greater inequities. So I think one of the successes we've had is really changing the conversation. You know, we had literally a full decade of what we need is more accountability. And we're starting to hear more dialogue now that's about, hey, wait a second, how do we, you know, promote innovation? How do we get to more leadership? How do we, what do we do to empower students? What do we do to create partnerships between parents and students and teachers? And so changing the conversation, I used to walk into school board meetings and I literally was like, I can't believe we're having these conversations. And now I'm encouraged because I hear parents speaking out and they're talking about, let me tell you about my students' needs and what's not happening and that sort of thing. I think that, you know, we've seen some changeovers over school boards. Jeffco school board changed over from, you know, the Tea Party kind of those intent on privatization. I think Denver School Board, the Denver community has become aware that that Denver School Board has been just immensely destructive to neighborhoods, particularly vulnerable neighborhoods. So I think we'll see a changeover in that school board leadership. And if not this election cycle, then definitely the next election cycle, I think we'll make big headways. I think, you know, in terms of legislation, we did see the federal government at one point leading No Child Left Behind that said, we're going to evaluate schools based on test scores and we're going to hold them accountable. And now what we have from Congress is a recognition of that's a total impossibility, that Congress never had the capacity to control, you know, neighborhood schools, and to attempt to do so was a huge waste of resources, time, and energy. So we saw in the reauthorization of the Elementary Secondary Education Act, no, we're going to defer to states. Still, I think that you have corporations and you have big foundations like Walton and Bill Gates who have used high stakes testing as a way to both discredit public education and a way to exert, you know, power and control. So we have a long ways to go. I don't by any means suggest that we're there. We have a long ways to go. But we have changed the conversation, and we have made some headway. And if anything, I think parents and teachers are starting to not so much point the blame at each other and recognize that there are huge system problems that have to be addressed. So that's one of the headways. In terms of where do we go from here, I'll tell you, when people say to me, Angela, what's the answer? What can we do? What I tell them is that we have to develop a tolerance for chaos, because that's what public education is. You know, it's individual students finding their way, and it's messy, and it can't be prescribed, and it can't be directed externally. It is them, you know, having the environments and the support systems that say, I trust you to take risks with your own learning. I trust you to experiment. I trust you to follow your own questions to whatever end they have. And, you know, we have to recognize that in democracy and in the nature of humanity, that there's a high degree of uncertainty, and that, you know, there's a lot of people like Democrats for Education Reform and Stand for Children, and they're willing to offer up those candy-coated solutions of, you know, we'll offer you security. But the reality is that security is an illusion, and we're seeing firsthand the cost of forfeiting our children's freedom and our children's rights and the education profession's authority and autonomy. What we've given up and sold out is freedom and opportunity. And you know, it's we have nothing to we have absolutely nothing to show for 2 decades of high stakes testing and standardization. We have nothing to show for it. We have more at-risk kids. We have wider achievement gaps. We have parents that are more disenfranchised and disengaged. We have, you know, dollars that literally aren't making it to the classroom. They never get to the classroom. So we're spending more money, we're wasting more money, and we have, you know, poorer results than we've ever had before. So at some point, I think that the specific gains that we've made are simply that the realities of corporate reform are bubbling to the surface, and there's no way for those reformers to run and hide from the failure of what they've created.
Okay, anyone else have a question for Angela?
I do.
Okay, Tim. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Tim.
I go. Angela, I was wondering, have you had any luck engaging people who don't necessarily have a stake in education, people who are not teachers or former teachers or have kids in the system? And if you have had luck, how have you had that?
No, I haven't had luck engaging them, but the conversation and the argument that does appeal to those. So for example, you know, we have the baby boomer generation right now that is our largest population, and they are, you know, they're competing for limited dollars because they want those, you know, the AARP, we have this huge lobby, and they want the dollars for their resources to be able to stay in their home, for senior resources. And we have our children that are in direct competition for those public resources and those public dollars. And it provides an enormous challenge for those of us that are working for education. And we're seeing the long-term consequence of that because, you know, for example, Colorado is one of the lowest investments in public education. So the argument that I have that does appeal to that community of people is that if we do not invest early in education and our children in ways that are meaningful, we end up spending tenfold later on in, you know, incarceration, unemployment, mental health, you know, crime and violence. I mean, all of those things that we know, and that all of the data and all of the research and all of the evidence supports that our best use of public dollars is to invest in families and children in ways that are preventative and intervention early on. So things like early childhood education, things like, you know, healthcare for moms, things like, you know, initiatives that support families. We just had a race webinar with Uniting for Kids, and Dr. James Martinez, one of his comments was, you know, if you want to raise test scores, then, you know, raise income for low-income families. And, you know, helping people make those connections are so important. Another great example is, you know, this homeless issue. People see, well, we have a homeless issue and we have a housing affordability issue, and people are like, I can really get behind that housing issue. And I say, yes, but do you understand that if at-risk children had sustainable housing and they weren't moving 3, 4, 5 times a year, what that would mean for their education outcomes? So if you are committed to affordable housing, just know that you're helping us work for the betterment of children as well, and helping for them to see the connections of the causes that they care about. And also, Tim, I'll just add that I think we don't do enough listening. That, you know, if we would start out with, instead of, did you know about what's bad about high stakes testing? And instead, you know, what are your concerns for children in our future? Those very open-ended questions of what are your concerns, and then helping them to see that our causes are connected, that our plights are, as Dr. Martin Luther King would say, you know, inextricably intertwined. The fate for all is inextricably intertwined. So Lita, you had a question too. Is that okay? Lita,
That was great. Thank you.
Okay. Lita, you had a question too.
Yeah, mine is more of an encouragement to you in reference to whoever came to you and said that you were making enemies. The truth hurts, and most likely those who became your enemies have no idea of what high stakes testing is doing to the children of color, because it's not, their kids are not affected. Okay, but in order to address the issue and bring healing to those areas, it's going to hurt. But once people's eyes are open and they recognize that change must come, that's when the healing's going to come in the school systems. And so whatever you do, keep doing what you're doing.
And thank you, Lita. Thank you for what you do too. And thank you.
Can I say something or sort of ask something that's kind of tied to that?
Sure, and then we'll get to you, Benzel. I see you've got your question.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know there was another question.
No, go ahead, Eve. Go ahead.
So this is a little bit tied to what's already been asked, but I feel that the current system that we've got now with choice and vouchers and school ratings creates winners and losers and pits have schools against have not schools. And I feel that with, shrinking dollars and, privatization, everyone is fighting for their share of the buck. And it's creating, it's creating a system where people aren't looking for sort of common good. They're saying, I just want mine. I just want my thing for my kid. And I'm sorry if other people's kids are hurt, but I can't care about that because I got to get my thing. I got to fight for my thing. And I feel that that's a very difficult wall to break through. So I wonder if you have any input about how, in this time when when we really are creating winners and losers, and it may get even worse, how to break through that wall and say, if some people lose, we all lose.
Well, what I would say is those of us that are engaged in work of social justice, that we've always been fighting that fight. And I can spend a whole lifetime on this, and the next generation, my children, will still be fighting that fight. I mean, part of what we do is not that we think that we're ever going to get to the ideal of, equity and community and unity, but a recognition that that's the work that has to be done, and it's important. And we've seen in, countries that have lost the commitment to the collective good, what lengths they're willing to go to save themselves. And that's a frightening proposition. So I write about that in my book, Seeds of Tomorrow. I mean, we look at, what the progression is. And I remember one of my mentors, when I first started taking her class, she wrote on the board this question, Marie Wersing, and that's who I dedicated the book to, but she wrote on the question, what were the conditions that gave rise to Hitler's Nazi Germany? And, those conditions were a sense of hopelessness. The conditions were like economic devastation. And, what Hitler offered was a scapegoat, and he offered a solution. And we should be wary of those kinds of things. I think we're seeing our Latino community right now being scapegoated. That illusion of that there is an elite class, that we need to be particularly concerned about that kind of approach that sets up a two-tiered education system where there's, the haves and the have-nots, and the haves get to have more and the have-nots, have less. So I think that's, we've already been there. We've lived that. We know what that looks like. And we had made some significant progress in terms of desegregation, in terms of equity and the civil rights movement. And I think what we're seeing now is kind of that we don't want a great equalizer. Those that currently are in the power structure, the dominant power structure, they are trying to annihilate those mechanisms and those systems that contribute to equalization. And education is the number one equalizer in, the United States. Has it been perfect? No, it hasn't been perfect, but it has been one of the mechanisms that has, led to democracy and led to greater equity, and really kind of supported the principles of what it means to be able to have liberty and justice for all. So the attack on public education system is part of the grand agenda that started with, and I'll just tell you how I knew this. I mean, I already knew this, but what happened in Colorado was Senate Bill 186, and Senate Bill 186 said, we're going to grade schools based on test scores. And when I looked at who was behind Senate Bill 186, and I said Bill Owens in the beginning, which was an error. It was a Republican governor, and I can't think of his name right now. I want to say it was Bill also, but I'm Bill O'Reilly is running through my mind, and I know that's not right. So, but it wasn't Bill Owens. It was a different, Republican governor. Anyway, what we've seen when I sat down with one of these masterminds of Senate Bill 186, he was also behind the voucher initiative in Colorado that ultimately was turned over in the Supreme Court. And I said to him, Steve Shuck was his name, and I said, Steve, he was a developer. And I said, what was your brainchild for high stakes testing and basing school quality on these measurements? And he said, we knew schools were failing. We knew public education was failing, and we just needed a mechanism to demonstrate that. And so, their goal was never to improve education. Their goal was never to bring greater transparency or greater accountability. It was always to undermine teachers. It was always to undermine public education, to create economic opportunities for private schools. So what we're seeing in the current, Trump administration is a result of decades of, intended, calculated policies that served to discredit public education. Benzel, you have a question too. And I'm looking at our clock, and I just want to tell you that our time is about up. Oh, can you try it again?
I said, so you want me to ask quickly?
You ask quickly and I'll answer quickly.
All right. So I guess and this really ties into so many things that you just said, which I know we don't have time to go into the narrative around, but the direct question really is, how much success have you seen in the involvement of those parents and children that are most affected by the broken education system, standardized testing, and based on your answer to what, has there been high participation or maybe not as high participation? What may need to change, or what message do you think, or how, to build that message, to have the voice of those most affected and that are the most vulnerable to really being a huge part of that collective voice?
Mm-hmm. So thank you for that question. And I think it speaks directly to what Eve kind of just set up in her question too, is that we're in this climate, where there's fewer resources, there's more people, there's a greater sense of fear. And so people get into survival mode in that case. And it's kind of like, I got to look out for my own. And so what I can say is that we are not going to see a shift in the current trends until there are more losers than there are people benefiting from this system. And losers isn't the right word, but there are more people losing from the current system than there are people that are benefiting from this system. And, we've, quite frankly, in the system of inequity where you're rewarding wealth, you have a lot of folks that are benefiting from the system. They look like they're great teachers, or they look like they're great students because, they've had, better test scores. And what we're seeing now is a shift of there really is a recognition that more people are losing because, for example, if you have your child go through the current education system as it is now, their entire education is oriented around these high stakes testing, that are then used to measure their schools, measure their teachers, measure them. And yet when they graduate from high school, they go on to careers, to college, to vocational, to all those, and they never see another one of those tests again. And the light bulb comes on in their head and they recognize, I may have been good at taking tests, but that kind of education didn't serve me. It doesn't serve me in my future. It doesn't support me in my career. It doesn't support me as a citizen. It doesn't support me, as a father or a spouse or a neighborhood or a neighbor or community member. So just, I think this next generation, I mean, I'm seeing this next generation that is more emboldened, that is more saying, no, I'm not going to conform with that. And, I'm not interested in you having control. I want opportunity. I want to be able to follow my own path. I want to be able to, explore my own interests. I don't care how I'm doing compared to Julie or Javier over there. I care how I'm doing according to what my own personal goals and interests are. And as students grow up and, begin to make those connections, I think that we'll see more participation on their part. I think, unfortunately, until it hits a pain point for you, people are not willing to engage. And, there's a lot of research to suggest that people need basically 6 contacts before they're willing to take action. So part of our challenge as organizers and community leaders and advocates is just that we continue to get the message out there, and that we deliver different kinds of messages through different mediums so that we can reach the most amount of people in a way that they can hear it. And participation is increasing, but unfortunately, people I think are going to have to get a lot more uncomfortable and have to live with the discomfort of a system that really works counter to both the needs of children and counter to what good education is, before they're willing to take action. But it's coming, and we're seeing the direction towards that. So I'm looking at our time, Amy, and I know you had one last question for me, in terms of what's next for Uniting for Kids. And
so Angela, sorry to interrupt, before you do that, I see Eric Lambert has a question. Can you address that quickly? Do we have time to do that?
Sure. Why can't we use the money from weed sale and help low-income families and children? Because that money was earmarked in those ballot initiatives. And, I hear people saying, the marijuana money is making its way to schools. And this is what I'll say about that. If we continue in our current direction of directing the money towards administrators, punishments and sanctions, management and control, that money is not serving the interests of children. So our current policies, and like, for example, performance pay, the cost of performance pay, and I can't remember the numbers, but it was like, huge numbers to implement Senate Bill 191 that linked, paying teachers based on those test scores. It's eating up what few resources we have. So the READ Act required that we had, 21 assessments. And yet what we know is if we would have invested in early childhood education for those children, and small class sizes and libraries, that those kids would be reading. And instead, they passed legislation that said, no, we need all these means of accountability. So our money is not making it to the kids, and it's not making it to the areas where we need it. And so I just don't know that spending, it's not just a money. It's just not a question of having more money. We have to spend that in ways that we know serves kids and serves our education system. A lot of kids. Okay, so I'll just say a little bit about alternative education. Is here in Colorado, we had one of the most robust alternative education system throughout the country. We have a good friend of ours that I work with, Don Glines, that was a leader in alternative education. He hosted one of our webinars. It was one of our guests. And here in Colorado, we honestly had a great diverse, we had magnet schools that were Montessori, we had dual language programs, we had vocational programs, we had lots of alternative schools. And what happened with No Child Left Behind is when we said there's only a one size fits all and we're going to measure all kids according to that single standard, it literally killed all innovation and killed all those alternative models. So long as we continue to have high stakes testing as a means to measuring success, we're not going to get to those alternative models. Even if those schools call themselves alternative, usually what they're doing is just creating some waivers, but they're still bound by those accountability system. And this is the real danger in privatization, is that what we've done is overburdened our school systems with all these accountabilities. In Littleton, my district, Littleton Public Schools, for example, for 1 year, they're reporting, I don't know, they had like 21 reporting. And 7 years later, they had like 641. And then 7 years after that, it was like, had quadrupled. So we're seeing, all of this emphasis on the reporting. We see it, the State Department of Education in Colorado, while we've cut over 2,000 teachers across Colorado, that State Department of Education, their FTEs has doubled. So it's all about regulation, accountability, and then we're going to have these private schools that are offered up as, aren't these great? They have all this autonomy, all this flexibility to meet the needs of children. And our response needs to be, why can't we have that in our neighborhood schools? So thank you, Eric, for the question about how can you help with this issue. We really appreciate that. So let me answer that question. And what I'll say is that my role with Uniting for Kids is going to be shifting. I have been in a leadership role, and what we've done is work to put together an extraordinary team. And the people that are with Uniting for Kids are going to continue with Uniting for Kids. My role will shift just in that it'll be a support role as we navigate this transition. I've dedicated a lifetime to children and advocacy. And so I'm not going to go away. I'm just going to shift my energy. I need to, make a living, unfortunately. So, and I don't want to say that because my work is shifting a little bit, and I've been working at a systems level in terms of human development. And my work now, I've got a new leadership model. It's called an invitation, and you can find out about it on my website at angelaengel.com. But it's really about that continuing in a human development, more from a personalized standpoint. In terms of what's happening with Uniting for Kids, our core team, and we have a wonderful team. I just will tell you, Teresa Smith, Patrick Anderson, Eve Cohen, Susan Johnson, Carla Ferris, Liv Lay, Kayla. We have an extraordinary team at Uniting for Kids, Carol March. And so we are all continuing. No one is going away. My role is simply going to shift into a support role, and I'll be helping with the strategic planning. I plan to continue to do fundraising, and I'll be talking about, what's in the best interest of children and education until the day that I die. So I'm not going to go away or be quiet, but I am going to create an opportunity for some new people to step into some leadership roles. And I think that will bring some new energy to Uniting for Kids. And I think it will allow us to diversify and, just go where the needs are and the opportunities. So I want to invite all of those that are on the call to be part of the Uniting for Kids team. Our website is www.unitingforkids.com. I am meeting with a new group on May 30th, from 7 to 9 p.m. at Solid Grounds Coffee Shop in Littleton. It's right on Broadway. And so if you would like to come to that, it'll be an information session about, just ways exactly to answer your question, Eric, about getting involved. And so our work with Uniting for Kids continues. We have some, wonderful successes, and we're going to build on those. I don't know that next year will look like a year of expansion. It might look like a year of sustainability as we transition a new leadership team. But we are real proud of the work that we've done, and really proud of the team that we have. And we just intend to continue to build on that. So, and I thank everybody who's dialed in tonight and been part of this conversation.
Thanks, Angela, so much. And thank you all for your questions. That was very insightful. Angela, did you want a few of us with Uniting for Kids already to stay on and chat after for a few minutes? Or?
Yes. Yep. Let's do that. So if you are, I'll just say this, if you are interested in learning more about getting involved, please stay on. And if you're just joining us for this conversation, I'll, just say again, thank you so much. And you can learn more at www.unitingforkids.com. And we have a Facebook page. And perhaps if not now, you'd like to join us at a later time, the door's always open. So, and Amy, I'll just say thank you so much for hosting and facilitating the conversation. You did a great job. I'm going to close this, and if you would like to reach me, if you have personal questions, you can reach me at my website, which is angelaengel.com. And my personal email is angela_engel@msn.com. So thanks again for just everyone's, support and the collaborative efforts of all of this work, because it really has been a joint effort, and it wouldn't have happened without just great people recognizing the need and rolling up their sleeves. So I just want to say thank you. And I'm going to close the recording.